Kind of hi guys. This is kind of a Cockburn staff chat or kind of conversation. One of the kind of issues that came up in our usual kind of discussions we have is a paper going up to the Policy and Sustainability Committee called Creating Safe Spaces for Walking and kind of Cycling. And I think that the Cockburn would probably, in its kind of natural inclination, to support anything that's going to improve the conditions for active kind of travel around the kind of city, keeping the city a kind of a civil place and kind of in the like. But there's a couple of issues that come out of that, and I just wondered initial responses to it. Good idea, bad?
I mean, it's certainly true that as an organisation we're on the record of being supportive of anything which advances the case of active travel, pedestrians certainly, and also cyclists. The current paper is proposing a range of options which sound fine in themselves in terms of pavement widening and segregating cycle traffic from pedestrian traffic, and a number of other proposals, including bus gates and that sort of thing. So, in broad terms, these are proposals which we would probably, generally speaking, be supportive of. But the question perhaps is, are these proposals being brought forward with the due consideration to the variety of potential challenges and problems that might arise? Is there a due amount of consultation with residents and with businesses, or is it indeed just the council, truly responding to the current crisis, but also responding to the availability of funding from the Scottish Government? Okay. And though there is a timing issue, there's a consultation issue, perhaps.
Yeah, okay, it's fair point. I wonder whether some of the detail is kind of there. Any other kind of views, thoughts?
I think it's a bit concerning potentially that everything's so temporary. So we appreciate the crisis situation that we're in, but potentially doing everything in a very short termism is not necessarily the way we should be looking at the future of travel in the city.
Yeah. I pulled together kind of a few points out of the report, which maybe I'll just share now. We've talked about the report, but just to note some of the things I pulled out of the report of interest. Kind of notes that during this kind of lockdown period, there's been a 16% increase in cycle traffic, and for those of us like me who live in the city centre, that's really kind of obvious that there is a lot more kind of people out on bikes, and actually quite a few more people kind of walking and kind of enjoying the space, which is great. The report notes that social distancing is an issue, particularly as the city gets back to work in due course with challenges with public transport. So it suggests there's going to be an increase in car use. And indeed, down in England, part of the advice of managing social distancing on public transport is to use private transport. Quite extraordinary. It proposes that if approved, that the delegation of this whole programme of work goes to the chief exec and the leader and deputy leader of the council in consultation with ward councillors. But I think, James, as you'd suggested, there's no indication or proposal for public consultation kind of within the document that I've been able to see. And it kind of proposes to use kind of a mechanism under the Scotland Act, the various traffic acts, called a temporary traffic regulation order, to kind of advance the proposals. And those tend to be used for emergency things. So if you need to close the street because a building is collapsing or something like that, you tend to use a TTRO kind of process for doing it. And a comment that kind of leapt out for me kind of interestingly in thinking about it was in the justification of the use of these temporary traffic regulation orders. This quote note, in this case, the immediate danger is the risk of transmission of infection and the need of mitigation, that risk is a matter of urgency. And that makes a lot of sense on one hand, but it becomes interesting of using the transmission of the coronavirus as a means of street closures on another, and it's trying to join those kind of dots together. And kind of quite laterally, and I think Lucy, to pick up the comment you said is, I found this comment of the exact means of delineating the extra pedestrian space as yet to be resolved, and I'm reminded when last summer we did a journey as kind of staff around the city centre, looking at some of the summer streets kind of programs, these kind of the reminder, the kind of images that we kind of posted up on social media at the time. And I think it's fair to say that's the means of delineating temporary space enclosures is something which has not been resolved in this kind of city, as we can see. And I guess one of the real concerns that I have in terms of Edinburgh, the place, is that legitimate proposals being advanced for emergency measures can actually become more of the norm, and don't, they tend to be temporary and look temporary. And if they stick around too long, they become permanent. The reports talked quite a bit about closures of places like the Braids and Silver House, but buried within it, kind of laterally, that there's also a suite of proposals to implement under the emergency procedures proposed in this report a lot of the closures proposed in the city centre transformation project. So again, how's that going to work? How's it all fit together? And there's additional things like the key strategic proposals, the closure of Bank Street and North Bridge, which, if we're expecting more people to jump in their cars in due course, there's a lot of questions about how the city kind of functions going forward from that. So let me stop sharing that. So, what do we think about those ideas? Does that kind of flavor what we think?
I think it is worth calling out the issue of why an initiative which is about COVID, it should have such a focus on city centre projects that evolved through the city transformation process, was nothing to do with COVID. It was all about over-tourism and congestion on the central streets of the old town and so on. So why these particular projects have come forward when most people at the current time aren't in the city centre? That isn't where people are taking their exercise. That isn't where where many of the actual conflicts, perhaps, between pedestrians and cyclists are occurring. So why those projects? Why not a wider range of projects across the city where people are out and about at the current time? And also, even deeper within the report, there's, and this touches on the issue of consultation and public opinion, are things such as the rationalisation of bus stops, for example, which there, I think, and during saying that there's been a lot of discussion and hostility on the part of many stakeholders in the city about any talk of reducing the number of bus stops. So why is that there? What really has that got to do about social distancing and general issues of well-being within the current challenges of the COVID-19 pandemic?
DJ, you have any thoughts?
Well, there's no doubt that there's an aspiration for many Edinburgh citizens to look to other North European countries in how they handle the movement of people in their city centres. I question the lack of consultation. That's where I'm left slightly afraid that this is the use of emergency legislation to get round the difficulty of taking the entire city along with you on this journey. If they introduce lots of temporary measures which will see the segregation of already small pavements, it's more likely to turn people off to the ideas of greener transport, more pedestrianisation, more cycle lanes. If it's done in a haphazard manner because it hasn't been fully thought through, there's a real danger that it'll actually put progress back rather than take us towards a greener city. So that would be my fear in this.
Yeah. Okay. A lot of kind of interesting kind of points for us to consider, and hopefully these will be things that'll be debated because, of course, now the city's opening up its own governance kind of practices, and we hope that these points will kind of come out. Because as we know, so many temporary things become permanent solutions going forward. So if we don't quite crack this right, I guess it's going to be kind of an issue. So I think, perhaps our feeling is, if I can summarize it, is we have a sympathy, quite a strong sympathy in bits to the initiative and the thinking, and perhaps the underlying concern for the kind of citizens and wanting to support active travel. But there's probably an unease that we actually have with the use of processes that are really real emergency mechanisms for undertaking mainstream proposals that, in the harsh light of day, perhaps don't need to go down that kind of process. And a wider consultative process is probably the more comfortable way to go.